To help us better understand the developments at the ICC, we are joined today by international law expert Atty. Romel Bagares. Good to have you with us, Attorney. Welcome.
Good morning, Danny, and good morning to our viewers.
Good morning. Sir, let's just take a step back, maybe for our viewers to digest how significant is this confirmation of charges staged at the ICC, and based on what you've seen in the first 2 days, which direction is this heading? Are we heading for a trial? Is there still a very big risk that the case might be amended or even dismissed for trial?
The confirmation charges stage, this is the last part of the pretrial stage. This is where the judges determine whether there are substantive grounds to actually hold Mr. Duterte to trial. If the evidence presented are not rebutted. And yesterday, during the first day, we saw the prosecutor laid on the framework for their overall theory of the case for indirect co-perpetration. But there's actually an alternative theory here, which is not also highlighted in the much discussions in the Philippines. There's this alternative case for aiding and abetting crimes against humanity. But yesterday, the prosecutor presented now the details, the meat of the matter, on the merits of indirect co-perpetration. And during the first day, you probably remember that there was this dramatic presentation of former President Duterte's statements in the public across the 6 years that he was president, even from the beginning, even during his campaign. The theory is that these statements are not random, but they really are embodiments of criminal intent to commit crimes against humanity. And yesterday, the focus was on individual criminal responsibility to show that there is in fact a clear connection between the statements and then what happened, the killings, and that the statements, the intention, the criminal intent, was funneled through a formal state machinery where you have key persons from the beginning becoming part of the state, appointed to different responsible agencies of government, the DEA, the NBI, the DOJ, the PNP, and these people, the co-perpetrators, were the ones responsible for implementing what President Duterte designed himself, which is to neutralize or to kill drug suspects, drug addicts, and such.
Okay. Well, let's dig a bit deeper. We had reports earlier on that actually former President Rodrigo Duterte was quote-unquote happy with how the defense did it. Why would he be happy? In which sense is this? Do you feel that they have a strong defense?
Well, we don't. Well, of course, the President Duterte will have his own take on how the proceedings have unrolled so far. Actually, the defense will have their chance to lay down their own counter arguments and counter evidence on Thursday. So we don't really know yet exactly what shape the defense will take. But essentially, they will have to show that number one, the statements are not related to the killings. That the killings are totally arbitrary and random. That there's no state machinery, there's no state policy to kill people in the drug war. So that's what the defense should be doing tomorrow. They should poke holes in the narrative of the prosecution. This is not the first case as such taken up in the ICC. We have several or a few that somehow parallel what happened in the Philippines in some scale. And there was a conviction, but later on there was an acquittal on appeal, right?
Okay.
So there's that element there also, where the prosecutor has to show that there is really a policy, that the president was at the center of that policy, and there's a machinery that implemented that policy. This is the causation aspect to the case, and that's the job of the defense tomorrow, to show that. Or to concretely put it, that they should be able to show evidence that rebut clearly the narrative presented by the prosecutor in the last 2 days.
As a lawyer, as you mentioned, the burden is on the prosecution, especially to show that these statements are not hyperbole. The main defense is a lot are hyperbole. They've shown many instances where the president just blurts out, former president rather, blurts out certain words. And the second is that this is not politically motivated. By the current administration, and the defense has mentioned that, if you just look at who sent FPRRD to The Hague, it's very linked to the current administration. As a lawyer, for the let's say, if you think about what the prosecution should be doing, what can actually dispute this?
Well, the indirect co-perpetrator theory here simply states that there's a common plan. The president was part of the common plan, and that common plan was jointly implemented with criminal intent. So how did they show that yesterday? They said that all these statements were actually translated into policy. Now, the statements did not originate only when he was president, but there was a design from the beginning. In Davao, you have key personalities working with the president, and when he became president, the same key personalities were appointed to positions of power, to agencies that would be responsible for implementing the policy. So this is what the prosecution showed yesterday. That this is not arbitrary. That there really is a systematic plan, as shown in the circulars issued by the PNP on Operation Double Barrel, which implemented Tokhang on a nationwide scale. And the people who were with the president when he was mayor, Bato, De La Rosa, Isidro La Peña, and I don't know if I said the name correctly, Vitaliano Aguirre Gueran became NBI director, right? And these people, they occupied key agencies, executive agencies that were in fact responsible for law enforcement. So that is really important there, because we have a case in the ICC almost similar to Duterte's, because it was a sitting head. We say this is the case of Bagbo, who was sitting president of Cote d'Ivoire. He was subject of confirmation charges also for killings, crimes against humanity. There was a confirmation of charges. He was put to trial, and then the whole thing collapsed because the prosecutors were not able to show that there's in fact a clear connection to the statements, to the political statements, to the statements made with the state president and the resulting killings.
Okay, but we're still in the confirmation trial, diba? It's on the burden of the prosecution during the trial, if that does ever happen, to show this proof. This systematic situation for a conviction. Right now, what needs to be shown just to get to that stage of the trial?
Well, as I said, right, the common plan, the joint control and execution of that common plan with criminal intent. So this is with respect to the individual criminal responsibility of the president. And yesterday, the prosecution showed that the president had an essential contribution to this joint control and common plan. So he designed, he gave rewards to people, he appointed people to positions of power, and he made statements to implement this plan. So there were 10 points there that the prosecutors discussed, and then they presented the policy that embodied that intent, that design, that plan, and this is the operation plan Double Barrel. And this is really what distinguishes the Duterte case from the earlier case I mentioned, the Bagbo case, because there's no, in the Bagbo case there's no such written policy, but here you have several issuances from the PNP to the office of the president itself, because there was a memorandum later on issued by the president to continue the operations after a brief suspension arising from the Kion dos Santos case. So there is written policy, right? And the task of the prosecutor here, and we saw that yesterday, they said that the written policy really was meant to kill people, to target civilians, and the key words that were highlighted there were neutralize and danlaban, right? So the prosecutor said there is no doubt that the word neutralize here is not a hyperbole. It really meant what it meant, to kill people, to kill suspects, even without due process.
Sir, let's talk about the 8 co-perpetrators that were named. Is this just giving of evidence, or is there going to be a next steps here in terms of possible arrests, digging deeper into these specific people and their roles? How will this happen, or is there nothing to be said for at least for this week? Are there any new developments just because they were named?
Well, they were named because they were co-perpetrators and they were essential to the story, because without them, the president would not have been able to implement the policy, right? But without the president, there would be no such policy, and the drug war would not have been carried out the way it was carried out during those 6 years when Duterte was in power. But I would imagine that at this stage there should already be arrest warrants, albeit they are perhaps or most likely they have been sealed, meaning that they had not been made public, because in the rules of the ICC, the prosecutor can actually choose to make public the arrest warrants. In the case of Duterte, actually, initially the arrest warrant was sealed, but the decision was taken up later, that perhaps we should now make this public given the turn of circumstances in the Philippines. Well, the other day was that yesterday we heard the DILG secretary say that they are now looking for the people who have been named as co-perpetrators in the charge sheet before the document containing charges before the ICC. So I think if you put 2 and 2 together, that means that there really is already such an arrest warrant, but it's been sealed, or a set of arrest warrants against the other named co-perpetrators.
Is there a risk that something happens during the pre-trial, or is this something that you think will happen after, if the confirmation actually occurs? At this stage, is there any arrest that you could expect to happen?
It already all depends on our law enforcement authorities. But as you can see in the Duterte case, there will be no confirmation of charges for them if they're not arrested. Because it's a requirement for the confirmation of charges that the suspect be present during the confirmation. Otherwise, there will be no confirmation at all. That is why the arrest warrants are really key to moving the case with respect to them.
As a lawyer, can you nuance a co-perpetrator from one who could possibly actually be a state witness to these crimes, or somebody that was coerced to be part of this systemic situation?
We've heard that, in fact, in the last 2 days, that there are insiders. This is really also important, that aside from the documentation, the witnesses to the crimes, you have insiders who were part of the plan, and they helped implement the plan. But at some point, they had a change of heart, and then they decided to stop doing what they were being asked to do. And that's quite possible. So you actually need insiders in this prosecution if you want it to be successful. And we've seen that also in the past prosecutions in the ICC, that the policy, if the policy is there, someone has to testify that this is in fact the policy, and this policy was really meant to implement to kill people, to commit crimes against humanity. Because I was there, or we were there, and we were made to implement this policy and target civilians.
Is there a possibility that the prosecution could ask them to be witnesses?
That's actually what the prosecution should be doing. I'm sure that they have done that with certain members of the DDS. We know that from the past reports. Key personalities who were with Duterte when he was mayor, who'd been working for Duterte for a long time. So they know a lot of insider stories and facts about how the DDS carried out its work for Duterte when he was mayor. That's really essential, that you get someone who was there, who was part of the whole plan, and can testify as to exactly, number one, the intent is important, and number two, the nature of the policy, and then how it was implemented.
Would that get them, quote unquote, off the hook?
Well, we have similar principles, right, in the Philippines, but that they should not be the most guilty, that and later on they will be discharged as a witness to the trial. So we have similar principles in international criminal law, because there's a recognition there that you cannot effectively prosecute cases of this nature, very complex, requiring evidence, right? Without people who actually were there. So there are rules for that also in international criminal law, as practiced in the ICC.
Two of them are sitting senators. Are they in any shape or form immune at the moment from arrests or from having to participate if called by the ICC?
Well, there's that debate, right? Because our jurisprudence so far said that if the Senate is in session, then the tradition is that you may not be arrested while the Senate is in session. But there's also the argument that this is a different case. This is a case involving international criminal justice. The stakes are higher. What are involved are norms that are binding on the international community. And this is also the first time that there's such a prosecution for sitting legislators. So I would imagine that if there's such an arrest warrant and the Senate or Congress is in session, this question might go to court, because we don't have any precedent just yet. It is a political practice. It is legislative practice. We've seen that many times during the Arroyo administration, when certain progressive legislators were targeted for prosecution, and they practically lived out of the halls of Congress, of the House of Representatives, when arrest warrants were issued against them by local courts.
But in this case, since we have not officially rejoined the ICC, and it took quite some force to even get former President Rodrigo Duterte to The Hague, do they have, let's say, is there a weaker case for them to be brought to The Hague at this moment, or is there going to be a significant shift once we do rejoin the ICC?
In the ICC there are also rules for informal cooperation, and that's what actually we saw when President Duterte was arrested and surrendered to the ICC. Ostensibly, clearly we've withdrawn from the Rome Statute, but within the Rome Statute itself, there are rules there dealing with informal cooperation. And once you cooperate informally, there's also a corresponding set of obligations, and that's what the Philippines did, without doubt, through the pronouncements before and after the arrest of President Duterte. We've seen that, in fact, the Marcos administration had been cooperating with the International Criminal Court through backroom discussions and negotiations. So with that informal cooperation, according to the ICC rules, the Philippines accepted certain obligations with respect to the ICC. And but of course, it's a very unpopular political move, and we don't know how things will turn out if this second set of arrest warrants are actually issued against key allies of the president, like Senator De La Rosa and Senator Bongo, closely identified with the president.
What is your take on VP Sara officially announcing her bid for the presidency in just 2 years? Would this, let's say, protect the coke perpetrators in any way if she does win the highest level of office?
Well, that's what you see here, really, the political side to the prosecution. Although the politics in the Philippines will not affect the proceedings, strictly speaking, but you can see in the statements of the lead defense counsel, Nicholas Kaufman, that his statements there are not wholly legal. He was actually addressing the constituency of the president, of Duterte. And this announcement, of course, is not coincidental. There is a political pattern to it. It's announcing that the stakes are now really high, and people or politicians should take note that it's going to be a war path from here on.
Have you seen situations, you are of course an international lawyer, in other countries that have withdrawn or not joined the ICC, that truly they keep the jurisdictions separate? So is there that risk if Sara Duterte does become president in 2 years that we contain this jurisdiction as her father had done?
Even if she becomes president and there are actually pending cases, let's say the case or against Senator Bato, Senator Bongo, the case will still be there. They will not go away because they've been filed already. And if the charges against the president are actually confirmed, that means that you can logically you can logically also say that there's a big possibility that the others will also be faced with a confirmation of charges and will be sent to trial, given the same evidence will be presented or had been presented against Mr. Duterte in these proceedings, right? So the cases will be there. That will actually limit the world for the co-perpetrators. They will not be able to travel to certain places because of the pending arrest warrants and such, and they can even be subject to
That's true.
financial sanctions.
Okay, so it's more the pressure is on for these people. The life will never be the same as before. What could this mean for accountability and international justice for the leaders that we have right now? Not just related to this drug war, but to a lot of other bigger scandals. Is there a stronger sense of transparency, trust now that we are watching a former president in these confirmation hearings?
So I will say, tell my students in class that this is a learning and teaching moment for the entire country, because our history really has been one of impunity, for martial law, no criminal accountability at all for the violations. And this is really the first time that we have this proceeding, and it's being broadcast live, right? So this should actually this is supposed to show that no one's above the law, no one's, even if a sitting president can just wantonly violate the law without any form of accountability. And to me, this is really important that Filipinos, young and old, they're able to actually watch the proceedings. They can see such a high standard of fairness in trial that you don't normally see in a Philippine court. The principle in ICC is equality of arms. You cannot hide evidence that tend to exculpate an accused. And in this case, the President Duterte has that right to get prosecutor whatever evidence they have, including evidence that tend to excuse him. That's not available in Philippine courts. There's no such provision in Philippine courts. But in the ICC, that's an obligation that's mandatory for either the prosecution or the defense.
But hopefully this also does strengthen our own courts because we would also want to be able to have accountability in our own courts, no? On that note,
that's the heart actually of complementarity. The first step should have been local courts, but in this case, they're unable and unwilling. That's why the ICC had to step in.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and insights, Attorney Romel Bagares, international law expert.
Welcome.